My husband smirked as he said, "You're fired. Get out. And drag that broken office chair with you." He bragged that Melissa would take my job and that divorce papers were already waiting. Security pushed me out, laughing. I didn't fight back, because the board meeting I arranged for tomorrow would expose every secret he thought I'd never dare reveal. "You're fired. Get out." Andrew slid the termination letter across his desk like he was discarding trash. Melissa stood beside him, her hand resting on his shoulder, her smile sharp and satisfied. "And drag that broken office chair with you," he added, gesturing to the tilted, worn-out chair in the corner. The one I'd complained about for 6 months. The one that had pinched my back through 18-hour coding sessions while he sat in his $1,500 Herman Miller executive chair. I stood there, staring at my husband of 3 years, my business partner of 3 years, the man who was now erasing me from the company I'd built with my own hands. Melissa, 7 years younger, perfectly polished, wearing a red power suit, smiled wider. "I'm taking over as CTO," she said. "Effective immediately." Security was already walking down the hall. I could hear their radios crackling. But what Andrew didn't know, what neither of them knew, was that my phone had just vibrated in my pocket. The signal I'd been waiting for. 24 hours until the emergency board meeting I'd secretly arranged. 24 hours until they learned exactly what happens when you try to destroy the woman who built everything. I didn't cry. Didn't argue. Didn't give them the breakdown they were clearly expecting. Instead, I walked to that broken chair, gripped its worn armrests, and dragged it across Andrew's polished concrete floors. It made a terrible scraping sound that echoed through the entire office. Every head turned. Every conversation stopped. This was supposed to be my moment of ultimate humiliation. Andrew had choreographed it perfectly. The public firing, the cruel detail about the chair, Melissa standing there as my replacement, security escorting me out like a criminal. But as I pulled that chair past the glass walls where my entire team watched, something crystallized inside me. This wasn't my lowest moment. This was the beginning of his downfall. Because Andrew had forgotten something crucial. I wasn't just some employee he could discard. I was the architect of everything Apex Digital Solutions had become. Every line of code. Every algorithm. Every innovation that made this company worth $23 million had come from my mind, my hands, my sleepless nights. And I had proof of everything he'd done. 3 years ago, none of this seemed possible. 3 years ago, Andrew and I were 2 graduate students at Arizona State University with nothing but ambition and each other. He was getting his MBA, always talking about disrupting industries and building empires. I was finishing my computer science master's degree, writing code that could predict cyber threats before they happened. We met at a campus coffee shop on a Tuesday night. I was debugging a complex algorithm, my 5th cup of coffee going cold beside my laptop. Most people's eyes glazed over when they saw my work. Andrew leaned over my shoulder and said, "Is that a predictive security model?" I looked up, surprised anyone recognized what I was building. He slid into the seat across from me without asking, and we talked until the coffee shop closed. He didn't understand the technical details, he was honest about that. But he understood the business implications immediately. "You're building something that could change how companies think about cybersecurity," he said, his eyes bright with genuine excitement. "Not reactive defense, but predictive protection. That's revolutionary." By our 3rd date, we were sketching out business plans on coffee shop napkins. He'd watch me code past midnight and say, "You're going to change the world, and I'll make sure everyone knows it." I believed him. God, I believed every word. 6 months later, we got married at the Maricopa County Courthouse on a Thursday afternoon. My parents flew in from Michigan. Lebanese immigrants who'd worked 2 jobs each to put me through school. My mother cried through the entire ceremony, clutching my father's arm and whispering prayers in Arabic. Andrew's parents drove over from their Scottsdale estate in a Mercedes that cost more than my parents had earned in 5 years. His mother wore designer sunglasses inside the courthouse and kept checking her phone. At the small lunch afterward, she asked me what I brought to the marriage besides my degree. "Education is valuable, of course," she said, cutting her chicken kebab into precise, small pieces. "But Andrew comes from a family with considerable resources and social standing. I'm simply curious what your contribution will be to this partnership." Andrew had defended me then. Put down his fork and looked his mother in the eye. "Hannah is going to build something that will make our name legendary in tech. Not because of Dad's real estate developments or your country club connections. Because of what her mind can create. I'd loved him so much in that moment. Believed we were building something together where both our names would matter equally. We started Apex Digital Solutions 2 weeks after the wedding, working out of our cramped 2-bedroom apartment in Tempe. The place cost $900 a month, barely affordable even with our combined graduate stipends, and smelled like the previous tenant's dog. But it had 2 bedrooms and we converted the second one into an office. I spent 4 months in that room barely sleeping, surviving on instant ramen and gas station coffee. I wrote every single line of code that became the foundation of our platform. The algorithm was designed to identify cybersecurity threats before they materialized, using machine learning to recognize attack patterns that traditional security systems missed entirely. Andrew worked in the living room, making calls to potential investors, building financial projections, creating pitch presentations. We were a perfect team, I thought. He handled the parts one wasn't good at, and I built the technology that made everything possible. Our first breakthrough came at 3 a.m. on a Saturday. I'd successfully predicted a simulated cyber attack 72 hours before it happened. The algorithm had identified seemingly random network probes that, when analyzed together, revealed a coordinated assault in its planning stages. I ran out of the bedroom practically screaming. Andrew was asleep on our ratty couch, laptop balanced on his chest. It works. Andrew, it actually works. He sat up immediately, alert despite being half asleep. Show me. I walked him through the data, pointing out the pattern recognition, the predictive accuracy, the revolutionary implications. He stared at the screen and I watched understanding dawn across his face. Not technical understanding, he'd never grasped the code itself, but business understanding. Hannah, he said quietly, this is worth millions. This changes everything. Within 6 weeks, he'd secured a meeting with Richard Thornton, a prominent venture capitalist his father knew from their golf club. I prepared a comprehensive technical presentation, practicing my pitch until I could deliver it in my sleep. But when we walked into Richard's sleek downtown Scottsdale office, Andrew did most of the talking. He presented my work with a natural charisma I'd never possessed, translating complex algorithms into language that made investors lean forward with interest. Richard barely glanced at my technical documentation. He watched Andrew, nodding, occasionally interrupting with questions that Andrew handled smoothly. Near the end of the meeting, Richard turned to me almost as an afterthought. Your husband's quite the salesman, he said with an approving smile. You're lucky to have someone who can communicate your technical work in terms investors actually understand. Lucky. That word landed strangely, but I pushed the feeling aside. We got the investment. $1 million in exchange for equity and board representation. I was there when the papers were signed, but I spent most of the meeting waiting in the reception area because Richard's assistant had only prepared 1 chair in the conference room. Just some final details, Andrew had said, kissing my forehead before disappearing inside. Nothing you need to worry about. I'd sat in that reception area for 40 minutes, watching assistants hurry past with important documents, feeling increasingly out of place in my simple dress while everyone else wore expensive suits. That night we celebrated with cheap champagne from Trader Joe's, drinking it straight from the bottle in our apartment. We did it, Andrew said, pulling me close. We actually built something real. We did, I agreed, resting against his chest. But even then something felt slightly wrong. The way he'd said we, while taking sole credit in Richard's office. The way my name had been absent from most of the pitch. The way I'd waited outside like an afterthought while he signed documents that would shape our company's future. I told myself I was being oversensitive. That this was just how business worked. That what mattered was building something meaningful together. The warning signs were there from the beginning. I just refused to see them. The first real crack appeared during an investor presentation 6 months later. Andrew described me as our talented lead developer, instead of co-founder. When I confronted him privately afterward, he laughed it off. It's just positioning for investors who want clear leadership, he said. You know how they are. They need to see a single vision, a single leader. It doesn't change anything about our actual partnership. But it did change things. It changed how people saw me. How they spoke to me. How they valued my contributions. By the time we hired our 10th employee, Andrew was scheduling board meetings without telling me. Making strategic decisions without my input. interrupting me during team meetings to clarify my technical explanations in simpler terms, as if I couldn't communicate my own innovations. I kept telling myself it was normal growing pains. We were scaling fast, and maybe this was just how companies evolved. Maybe I was being paranoid. My best friend Leah tried to warn me. She worked as an accountant for tech startups and had known me since undergrad. One afternoon, she stopped by the office to drop off some documents and saw the new organizational chart Andrew had created. She pulled me aside in the parking lot, her expression serious. "Hannah, you're a co-founder. Why does that chart make you look like a mid-level manager reporting to 3 different people?" I defended him. Said it was just investor optics, meaningless structure for presentations. Leah grabbed my arm. "I've seen this before. Men who start erasing women from the company story don't stop. They keep going until you're completely invisible. And by the time you realize what's happened, you've lost everything." I'd laughed it off. Told her she was being dramatic. But that night, lying awake beside Andrew while he snored peacefully, her words echoed in my head. I couldn't shake the feeling that she'd seen something I was too close to recognize. I pushed the doubts away. Buried myself in work. Told myself that what mattered was the technology, the innovation, the impact we were making. I didn't know then that I was already being systematically erased. That the man I loved was building a narrative where I didn't exist. That by the time I finally saw the truth, he'd already positioned himself to take everything. But now, dragging this broken chair through the office while everyone watched, I understood something Andrew had never considered. The woman who builds the foundation knows exactly how to make it crumble. And tomorrow, at the board meeting he didn't know I'd called, he was going to learn that lesson the hard way. I loaded that broken chair into my trunk and drove straight home. Not to the house I shared with Andrew, but to the small apartment in Tempe I'd rented 2 months earlier under my maiden name. The apartment Andrew didn't know existed. The place was sparse. A desk, 3 monitors, a mattress on the floor, and a mini fridge stocked with energy drinks. This was where I'd been coming every night after Andrew fell asleep, building my case against him piece by piece. I set the chair in the corner of the living room like a trophy and opened my laptop. 24 hours until the board meeting. I needed to review everything one final time, make sure the presentation was airtight. But first I needed to understand how I'd gotten here. How I'd missed the signs so completely. The answer had a name, Melissa Vance. She'd arrived 6 months before my world collapsed. I remember the day Andrew mentioned hiring a chief operating officer like it had been a casual afterthought. "We need someone to help scale operations," he'd said over breakfast one morning, not looking up from his phone. "The company's growing too fast for just the 2 of us to manage everything." I'd been surprised. "Since when are we recruiting for a COO? That's a huge hire." "I've been talking to a few candidates through my network. Nothing serious yet. But if we're going to hit our growth targets, we need operational expertise." The fact that he'd been recruiting without telling me should have been the first red flag. But I was buried in code working on a major platform upgrade that would triple our processing speed. I trusted him to handle hiring decisions. When Melissa came in for her interview, I was actually relieved. She walked into our conference room wearing a tailored navy suit that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. Her resume was intimidating. Stanford MBA, 5 years at Goldman Sachs, 3 more at a boutique consulting firm that specialized in scaling tech startups. She spoke confidently about operational efficiency, revenue optimization, and strategic growth planning. But what struck me most was simpler than that. She was a woman. Our company was dominated by male developers and salespeople. The only other women were 2 junior developers and our receptionist. I'd felt increasingly isolated as the company grew, the only female voice in leadership meetings where men talked over me constantly. Finally, I'd whispered to Andrew as Melissa presented her vision for restructuring our operations. "Another woman in leadership." He'd nodded, but I didn't see the look that crossed his face. I was too focused on Melissa's presentation. After she left, I turned to Andrew. "She's perfect. She understands operations in a way we desperately need, and having another woman in leadership would be incredible for company culture." "You think we should hire her?" he'd asked, and something in his tone should have warned me. Too eager. Too ready. "Absolutely. I think she could transform how we operate." Andrew had smiled and made the offer that same afternoon. Melissa started 2 weeks later, and within days she'd made her presence known. She reorganized our chaotic filing systems, implemented new project management software, renegotiated our office lease to include a full executive floor. She brought homemade cookies to morning meetings and somehow remembered everyone's birthday. She's amazing, our lead developer Casey told me after Melissa had solved a scheduling conflict that had plagued us for months. Where did you find her? Andrew's network, I'd said, feeling proud that we'd made such a strong hire. I thought I'd found an ally. Someone who understood what it was like to be a woman in tech, fighting for respect in rooms full of men who assumed they were smarter. I was catastrophically wrong. The late nights started about a month after Melissa joined. The first time Andrew had a reasonable excuse. Big investor presentation next week. Melissa's helping me put together the financial projections. The numbers need to be perfect. He'd kissed my forehead around 7 p.m., grabbed his laptop bag and headed back to the office. I'd worked from home that night, debugging a complex authentication issue. Around midnight I'd texted him, "How's it going?" No response. At 2:30 a.m. I'd heard his car in the driveway. He'd slipped into bed quietly and I'd pretended to be asleep. But I'd noticed the smell immediately. Floral perfume that wasn't mine, expensive and distinctive. The next morning I'd asked casually, "Late night?" "Exhausting," he'd said, pouring coffee. But we got the presentation dialed in. Melissa's incredibly sharp with financial modeling. The late nights became a pattern. Board materials. Quarterly planning. Strategic initiatives. Always something urgent that required Andrew and Melissa working together until 2 or 3 in the morning. I'd drive home alone from the office, heat up leftover Chinese food or pizza, and fall asleep on our couch waiting for him. Sometimes I'd wake up when he came in, catching that same floral scent clinging to his clothes. Other times I'd sleep through his arrival and wake up in the morning feeling cold and alone. When I finally worked up the courage to ask about the perfume directly, his response was immediate and sharp. "Are you seriously asking me this right now?" He'd set down his coffee mug hard enough that it cracked against the counter. "Melissa wears perfume, Hannah. Most professional women do. What exactly are you accusing me of?" The way he said it made me feel small. Paranoid. Unreasonable. "I'm not accusing you of anything," I'd said quietly. You're working late every night and I barely see you anymore. We're scaling a company. You of all people should understand that requires sacrifice." He'd softened slightly, pulling me into a hug that felt more obligatory than affectionate. "I know it's hard. But this is temporary. Once we get through this growth phase, things will calm down." I'd believed him because I wanted to believe him. Because admitting the alternative meant admitting my marriage was falling apart. Leah didn't let me avoid the truth as easily. We'd met for coffee one Saturday morning, one of the few times Andrew wasn't at the office with Melissa. I'd been exhausted, running on 4 hours of sleep, and I must have looked as worn down as I felt. "Hannah, you look terrible," Leah had said bluntly, sliding a latte across the table. "When's the last time you slept a full night?" "I'm fine. Just busy with the new platform rollout." "And Andrew? Where's he been?" I'd hesitated. "Working late. We've got a lot of investor pressure right now." "Working late with Melissa?" The way she said the name made me defensive. "They're working on quarterly projections." It's just work." Leah had leaned forward, her expression serious. "Hannah, he's coming home at 3 in the morning smelling like another woman's perfume. That's not paranoia. That's a pattern. You don't understand the pressure we're under. I understand that you're making excuses for behavior that would make any reasonable person suspicious." She'd grabbed my hand across the table. "I've known you since we were 18. You're one of the smartest people I've ever met. But when it comes to Andrew, you're blind." I'd pulled my hand away, angry at her for saying out loud what I didn't want to hear. "He's my husband. We're building this company together. I trust him." "Then you're a fool," she'd said quietly. We'd finished our coffee in uncomfortable silence, and I'd left feeling defensive and unsettled. But her words had planted seeds of doubt I couldn't ignore. The organizational chart appeared 3 months after Melissa joined, presented during a company-wide meeting that Andrew had scheduled without telling me. "We need clearer structure as we scale," Melissa had said, standing at the front of the room with a confident smile. "Investors want to see defined leadership hierarchy and reporting lines." She'd pulled up a slide showing a neat organizational chart. At the top, Andrew Hartwell, CEO. Directly below him, Melissa Vance, COO. And then various departments branching off. I'd scanned the chart looking for my name, my title, my position as co-founder. There, tucked away on the left side, 3 levels down. A small box labeled Technical Lead Hannah Karim, with a dotted line reporting to Melissa. Not co-founder. Not CTO. Technical lead. A middle management title that suggested I was just another employee. I'd felt the blood drain from my face as everyone in the room studied the chart. Casey glanced at me with confusion. Other developers whispered to each other. Any questions? Melissa had asked brightly. I'd stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. I have a question. Where's my co-founder title on this chart? The room went silent. Melissa's smile had faltered slightly. Hannah, this is just for investor presentations. It's about showing clear operational structure. I'm a co-founder of this company. I built the entire platform. And you've positioned me as a mid-level manager reporting to you. Andrew had stood up then, his voice calm and patronizing. Hannah, let's discuss this privately. No. I'd felt something break inside me. Everyone here knows I founded this company with you. I wrote every line of code. And now you're erasing me from the organizational structure. You're being dramatic, Andrew had said, and the way he said it, like I was an unreasonable child throwing a tantrum, made me want to scream. But I'd looked around the room and seen the expressions on people's faces. Some sympathetic. Others uncomfortable. A few, the newer employees who only knew Andrew's version of our story, looked confused, like they couldn't understand why the technical lead was making such a fuss. I'd walked out of that meeting and gone straight to Andrew's office. He'd followed me in and closed the door. That was unprofessional. I'm a co-founder, I'd said, my voice shaking. There shouldn't be hierarchy between us. He'd leaned back in his expensive Herman Miller chair, the $1,500 one he'd purchased while I still sat in a broken chair that tilted dangerously to the left, and studied me like I was a problem to be managed. It's just for presentations, Hannah. Investors want to see clear structure. This doesn't change our partnership. It changes everything, I'd said. That chart becomes reality. New employees will treat me like I'm just another manager instead of a founder. Melissa will think she has authority over me. Melissa is CEO. She does have operational authority. Over me. Over the person who built everything this company is based on. Over technical operations, yes. He'd stood up, walking around the desk to stand too close to me. Hannah, you're brilliant with code. Nobody's questioning that. But companies need structure. They need clear leadership. And right now, the leadership investors want to see is me at the top, Melissa handling operations, and you doing what you do best, building technology. The dismissal in his voice had been crushing. Like my role was small. Manageable. Replaceable. I'd left his office feeling like I'd just lost a fight I didn't know I was having. That organizational chart became gospel. New hires started calling Melissa their boss. She began scheduling meetings without inviting me, making decisions about technical timelines without consulting me. And Andrew stopped including me in board communications entirely. I was being erased from my own company, and it was happening so gradually that by the time I fully understood what was occurring, the damage was already done. The moment I knew for certain came on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. I'd walked into Andrew's office to ask about a technical decision, something routine, a question that should have taken 30 seconds. The door was ajar, so I'd pushed it open. Melissa was there, standing beside Andrew's desk, leaning over his computer screen. They were close, too close, their shoulders touching as they reviewed something together. The air was thick with her perfume. That same expensive floral scent I'd been smelling on Andrew's clothes for months. They jumped apart when I entered, but not quickly enough. I'd seen everything in that split second. The way her hand had been resting on his arm, the way he'd been looking at her with an intimacy I recognized because he used to look at me that way. Hannah, Andrew had said, his voice too loud, too forced. We were just reviewing the investor deck for the Series B pitch. Your husband has such brilliant strategic instincts, Melissa had added smoothly, adjusting her blazer. He's been teaching me so much about managing board relationships. The lie sat between us, obvious and ugly. I'd mumbled something about checking back later and left, my heart pounding so hard I thought I might be sick. That night, after Andrew came home at 11, earlier than usual, probably feeling guilty, I waited until he got in the shower. Then I did something I'd never done before. I opened his laptop. My hands trembled as I entered Andrew's password. The laptop sat on my knees in our locked bathroom, the shower still running behind the closed door. I had maybe 10 minutes before he'd finish and wonder where I'd gone. The desktop loaded, showing the usual array of folders and applications. My heart hammered against my ribs as I opened his browser, half expecting him to have deleted everything. But Andrew was arrogant. He'd never considered that I might look. His browsing history stretched back months, an unfiltered record of everything he'd been planning while lying beside me each night. The first thing I found were real estate searches. Not just casual browsing, saved listings with detailed notes. Luxury condos in downtown Phoenix with floor-to-ceiling windows and rooftop infinity pools. 3-bedroom units priced between $800,000 and $1.2 million. I clicked through them one by one, my stomach twisting tighter with each page. Good location for entertaining investors, read one note. Close to the new office expansion, said another. And then on a penthouse listing with panoramic city views. Melissa approved this one. Move-in ready by March. March was 3 months away. None of the notes mentioned me. Not a single reference to our new place, or Hannah would like the kitchen. These weren't homes he was considering for us. This was his future. His and Melissa's. The shower turned off. I heard Andrew actually humming as he reached for a towel. My hands moved faster, clicking through his calendar application. The appointments I found made everything crystallize into horrible clarity. Tuesday, 2 p.m., property viewing Meridian Tower. That was the same Tuesday he texted me saying he had a meeting with potential Series B investors. Thursday, 4 p.m., viewing Roosevelt Lofts. I remembered that day. He'd called saying the meeting was running long and he'd grab dinner downtown. Saturday, 11 a.m., final walk through Penthouse 4B. Last Saturday, when he told me he had an emergency board prep session. Every viewing had a second attendee listed, Melissa Vance. I clicked on his messages, finding a thread with her that went back months. Melissa, loved the penthouse. Perfect for what we discussed. 3 bedrooms gives us the space we'll need. Andrew, agreed. I'll make an offer this week. Timeline still looking good for March move-in, right after everything's finalized. Melissa, as long as we stick to the plan. The timing has to be perfect. Andrew, don't worry. I've got it handled. She won't see it coming. Not Hannah. Not my wife. Just she, like I was an obstacle to be managed rather than a person they were destroying. I heard the bathroom door handle rattle. Hannah? You in there? Just a minute, I called out, my voice remarkably steady. I took rapid screenshots with my phone, the camera shutter sound muted, capturing every damning message. Everything okay? Fine. Just finishing up. I closed the browser windows, clearing the history of my snooping but not his actual browsing data. Then I opened a random news article so the laptop would look like I'd just been reading. When I unlocked the door, Andrew stood there in his pajama pants, hair damp from the shower. He looked at the laptop in my hands. Needed to check something for work, I said casually. My laptop's downstairs. He nodded, not suspicious. Why would he be? I'd never given him reason to doubt my trust before. That night I couldn't sleep. While Andrew snored peacefully beside me, the sleep of someone who had no idea his secrets were unraveling, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, my mind racing through everything I'd discovered. At 2 a.m. I gave up pretending. I slipped out of bed, grabbed his laptop from the living room and locked myself in our home office. If he was planning to destroy me, I needed to know exactly how deep this went. I bypassed his main financial folders. Those would be sanitized, showing only what he wanted visible. Instead, I dug deeper, looking for hidden directories and archived files that most people forgot existed. That's where I found them. Financial records he'd moved to an obscure backup folder, probably thinking they were safely buried. Wire transfers to companies I'd never heard of. Tech Consult Solutions. Strategic Growth Partners. Meridian Advisory Group. Each one receiving regular payments ranging from $10,000 to $25,000, all categorized as operational consulting fees. I opened a new browser tab and searched for Tech Consult Solutions. The website looked professional enough at first glance. Generic stock photos of diverse business people in meetings, vague language about strategic business optimization. But the address listed in the footer made my blood run cold. It was in Mesa. The same address Melissa had listed on her employment paperwork as her emergency contact. Her cousin's house. I searched the other companies. Strategic Growth Partners traced back to a Scottsdale address I recognized. Andrew's college roommate Marcus owned a law practice there. Meridian Advisory Group had no physical address at all, just a registered agent in Delaware. They were shell companies. Fake businesses set up to funnel money out of Apex Digital Solutions and into Andrew's and Melissa's pockets. I pulled up our company's bank records. I still had access to those, though Andrew probably assumed I never looked at them. Transaction by transaction I traced the theft. March, $15,000 to Tech Consult Solutions for Market Analysis Consulting. April, $12,000 to Strategic Growth Partners for Legal Advisory Services. May, $20,000 to Meridian Advisory Group for Operational Efficiency Assessment. Month after month, systematic theft disguised as legitimate business expenses. I pulled up a calculator and started adding. Over 18 months, they'd stolen $387,000. Not enough to bankrupt the company or trigger immediate red flags during quarterly reviews. But steady, consistent embezzlement that added up to a fortune. My hands shook as I took screenshot after screenshot, uploading each one to a cloud storage account I'd created using my maiden name. I cleared browser histories, closed windows, made sure everything looked untouched. When I crawled back into bed at 4 a.m, I didn't feel hurt anymore. That emotion had burned away, leaving something colder and harder in its place. Andrew stirred beside me, draping an arm across my waist in his sleep. The casual intimacy of the gesture made my skin crawl. This man, who I'd loved, trusted, built a life with, had been systematically stealing from me while planning to throw me away like garbage. I lay there in the dark, his arm heavy across my body, and let the rage crystallize into something useful. Something strategic. The next morning I called Leah before Andrew woke up. "Can you meet me? Today. It's urgent." She heard something in my voice. "Give me an address. I'll be there in 30 minutes. I chose a coffee shop in Gilbert, far enough from our usual haunts that we wouldn't run into anyone from work. When Leah arrived, I was already at a corner table, my phone face down on the table between us. "What happened?" she asked, sliding into the seat across from me. I unlocked my phone and handed it to her without saying anything. Let her see the screenshots. The real estate searches, the messages with Melissa, the financial records showing months of theft. Her face went pale as she scrolled through the images. When she finally looked up, her expression was a mixture of fury and pity. "Hannah, this isn't just an affair. This is criminal fraud. They're embezzling from your own company." "I know," I said, and my voice sounded strange to my own ears. Flat. Empty of the emotion churning underneath. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know. That's why I called you." Leah set the phone down carefully like it might explode. "You need more than this. Screenshots can be dismissed, explained away. You need original documents, corporate records, anything that proves these shell companies are fake and that Andrew and Melissa are behind them. How do I get that without them knowing?" Carefully. She leaned forward, her voice dropping even though we were alone in our corner. "Hannah, you need to understand what's happening here. Andrew isn't planning to leave you and run away with Melissa. He's planning to take everything you've built and make you disappear from the narrative entirely. The divorce papers are probably already drafted. The ownership transfer documents are probably ready to file." I'd suspected this, but hearing Leah say it out loud made it real in a way I'd been avoiding. "He's going to force me out." "He's already forcing you out. The organizational chart that erased your co-founder title? That was step 1. Making you look like an employee instead of an owner. Once the board and investors see you that way, it's easier to terminate you. But I own 48% of the company." "Do you?" Leah asked quietly. "Have you checked the actual corporate filings recently? Because if Andrew's been planning this for months, I guarantee he's already started tampering with ownership documents." The coffee shop suddenly felt too hot, too small. How would he even do that? Marcus, Andrew's lawyer friend who's helping with the shell companies? He'd be the one filing amended ownership documents with the state, forging your signature on transfer agreements. It's all digital now. If you're not actively monitoring it, you wouldn't even know it happened until it was too late. I felt sick. I need to check the state business registry. Yes. Tonight. And Hannah. She grabbed my hand across the table, her grip tight enough to hurt. You need to move faster than he is. Document everything, but don't confront him yet. If he knows you're onto him, he'll accelerate his timeline. You need to stay invisible while you build your case. Invisible, I repeated. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd been made invisible in my own company for months. Now I needed to become a ghost by choice. That evening I went to the office and acted like nothing had changed. Smiled at Melissa when she explained the new budget process she and Andrew had developed without consulting me. Nodded when Andrew talked about our growth projections in terms that completely ignored the platform upgrades I'd been building. But after everyone left, I stayed late. Went into Andrew's office and accessed the corporate filing cabinet he thought was secure. Inside, I found copies of our original incorporation documents, investment agreements, board minutes. I photographed everything with my phone, working quickly and methodically. Then I went to my own desk and started pulling code repositories, commit histories, email chains from our early days that proved I'd built the entire platform alone. Every piece of evidence that showed my authorship, my innovation, my role as the true architect of Apex Digital Solutions. I bought a small voice recorder the next day from an electronics store, paying cash. Over the following weeks I recorded everything. Andrew presenting my security algorithms to investors as team innovations guided by his strategic vision. Melissa telling new hires that Andrew was the genius behind our success. I became a ghost in my own company, documenting my own erasure while they celebrated what they thought was their victory. And every night, in my secret apartment that Andrew didn't know existed, I built the presentation that would destroy them both. They'd underestimated me completely. Assumed I was too trusting, too naive, too focused on code to notice what they were doing. They were about to learn exactly how wrong they were. The voice recordings were damning, but I needed something more. Something Andrew couldn't talk his way around with charm and connections. I needed hard proof that he'd committed fraud, documentation so clear that even his father's golf club friends couldn't ignore it. That proof existed somewhere in the corporate filings and I needed to find it. The problem was access. Andrew controlled most of our official corporate documents, keeping them in a locked filing cabinet in his office. But there was one person who would have copies of everything from the beginning. Richard Thornton, our first major investor. I drafted the email carefully, trying to sound casual rather than desperate. Asterisk, Hi Richard, I'm reviewing our corporate governance structure as we prepare for some potential new investors. Could you send me copies of the original investment documents and incorporation papers? I seem to have misplaced my files during our last office move. Thanks so much. Sis. I hit send before I could second-guess myself, then stared at my inbox, refreshing compulsively. Richard responded within an hour. Of course, Hannah. Attached are all the original term sheets, incorporation documents, and board agreements from our Series A. Let me know if you need anything else. My hands trembled as I opened the attachments. PDF after PDF loaded on my screen. Documents I'd signed 3 years ago when everything was new and full of promise. The original incorporation papers were dated January 15th, 3 years ago. Right there on page 3, under Founding Members and Equity Distribution. Hannah Karim, 50% ownership, co-founder, Chief Technology Officer. Andrew Hartwell, 50% ownership, co-founder, Chief Executive Officer. Equal. We'd been equal partners. I'd known this, of course, but seeing it in black and white made something twist in my chest. This was what we'd agreed to. What we'd built together. I opened the State Business Registry website and pulled up Apex Digital Solutions' current corporate filing. The one that was supposed to be public record, showing our official ownership structure. The document had been last updated 6 months ago. Filed by Marcus Brennan on behalf of the company. I scrolled down to the ownership section and my vision blurred. Hannah Karim, 35% ownership, technical lead. Andrew Hartwell, 45% ownership, Chief Executive Officer. Melissa Vance, 20% ownership, Chief Operating Officer. Not co-founder. Technical lead. And my 50% had been reduced to 35. According to the filing, I'd signed ownership transfer documents on March 12th, agreeing to dilute my shares to bring in Melissa as a strategic partner with 20% equity. I'd never signed anything like that. March 12th was 6 months ago. I'd been in San Francisco that entire week at a cybersecurity conference, presenting our platform to potential enterprise clients. I downloaded the transfer documents attached to the state filing and zoomed in on the signature line. There was my name, signed in flowing script that looked vaguely like my handwriting but wasn't quite right. It was too looped. The in Kareem was too angular. Someone had tried to forge my signature, but they hadn't been particularly careful about it. I pulled up other documents I'd actually signed. Employment agreements, vendor contracts, office lease renewals. My real signature was there for comparison and the differences were obvious. The forged document wasn't even close. Andrew had committed securities fraud. Forged my signature to illegally transfer corporate ownership. And he'd been so arrogant, so certain I'd never check, that he hadn't even bothered to make it convincing. I sat back in my chair at the secret apartment, staring at the two documents side by side on my monitor. Original filing showing 50-50 ownership. Current filing showing I'd been diluted to 35% through documents I'd never signed. This was it. The smoking gun. Even if Andrew could explain away the affair, even if he could justify the late nights and the real estate searches, he couldn't explain this. This was black and white proof of fraud. I saved everything to my encrypted cloud storage, then made 3 additional backup copies on separate drives. This evidence couldn't disappear. My phone rang, startling me. Leah's name flashed on the screen. "Did you find something?" she asked immediately. Andrew forged my signature to transfer 15% of my ownership to Melissa. It's filed with the state. The forgery is obvious. It doesn't even match my actual signature. Leah was quiet for a moment. "Hannah, that's a felony. Securities fraud, forgery, he could face criminal charges." "I know. Are you ready for that? For what happens when you expose this?" I thought about Andrew's face that morning at breakfast, smiling at me while planning my destruction. Thought about Melissa standing in his office with her hand on his shoulder. Thought about that organizational chart that had erased me from my own company. "Yes," I said. "I'm ready." But I wasn't just ready, I was determined. And determination required a plan. That afternoon I called Sandra Westbrook, a lawyer whose name Leah had given me. She specialized in high-asset divorces and business disputes, with a reputation for being ruthlessly effective. Her office was in North Scottsdale, all glass and steel and expensive art. When I walked in carrying a laptop bag full of evidence, she studied me with sharp eyes. "You're Hannah Kareem," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes. I looked up your company after you called. Apex Digital Solutions. $23 million valuation. Impressive. It's built on technology one created. Then let's make sure you keep it." I spent the next 2 hours walking her through everything. The affair. The embezzlement. The forged ownership documents. The real estate searches showing Andrew and Melissa planning a future together. Sandra took notes without interrupting, her expression growing more serious with each revelation. When I finished, she set down her pen and leaned back in her leather chair. "Hannah, you understand this isn't just a divorce case. This is corporate warfare. Your husband isn't just leaving you, he's trying to steal your company while destroying your marriage simultaneously." "I know. Arizona is a community property state. Everything acquired during marriage should be split 50-50. But Andrew has been systematically repositioning assets to make it look like he owns the company and you're just an employee. If we're not strategic, you could walk away with almost nothing despite building everything." The words confirmed my worst fears, but hearing them from a lawyer made them real in a way I'd been avoiding. "What do I do?" Sandra smiled, and it wasn't a warm expression. "We strike first. We strike hard. And we strike with overwhelming evidence. You don't have just a divorce case, you have a fraud case. Maybe even a criminal case if the district attorney's office gets interested." "I want the company," I said. "Not half of it. All of it. Andrew doesn't get to steal what I built." "Then we need to move fast." "Has he filed divorce papers yet?" "I don't think so. But based on the messages I found, he's planning to file right after forcing me out of the company. He wants to make it look like I was just an employee, so I have no claim to the business in the divorce." Sandra nodded. "Classic strategy. Diminish your role, then divorce you before you realize how thoroughly you've been screwed." She opened her laptop and started typing. "Here's what we're going to do. You're going to call an emergency board meeting using your original co-founder authority. Can I still do that? Even with the forged documents showing reduced ownership. The forged documents are fraudulent, which means they're invalid. Your original 50% ownership still stands legally. And as a co-founder, you have rights outlined in your original shareholders' agreement that can't be stripped without your genuine consent. Hope flickered in my chest for the first time in weeks. So I can call a board meeting? You can and you will. You're going to present every piece of evidence to the board. The fraud, the embezzlement, the conspiracy. And you're going to request immediate termination of Andrew and Melissa, with full investigation into criminal charges. What if the board sides with Andrew? Sandra's smile turned sharp. With the evidence you have, they'd be idiots to side with him. And if they do, we take this to the district attorney and the media. Tech CEO commits securities fraud and embezzles from his own company makes for a very interesting headline. Over the next 2 weeks, I lived a double life. During the day, I went to the office and pretended everything was normal. Smiled at Andrew over breakfast. Attended meetings where Melissa explained strategies she'd developed without consulting me. Watched Andrew present my platform improvements to potential clients as if he understood the first thing about how they worked. At night, I retreated to my secret apartment, the one Andrew didn't know existed, and built the case that would destroy him. The apartment became my war room. 3 monitors displayed different sections of my presentation. One screen showed the financial forensics, every fraudulent wire transfer, every shell company, every stolen dollar traced back to its source. Another screen held the forged documents side by side with my real signatures, the differences highlighted and annotated. The third screen contained my code repositories, commit histories and email chains proving I'd built every major innovation alone. I worked until 4 or 5 every morning, surviving on energy drinks and the cold fury that had replaced the hurt in my chest. 63 slides. That's what it took to document 3 years of systematic betrayal. Slide 1. Original incorporation documents showing 50-50 ownership. Slide 2. Forged transfer documents with signature analysis proving they weren't mine. Slide 3. Current state filings showing fraudulent ownership dilution. Slides 4 through 28. Financial records. Every wire transfer to fake consulting companies. Every stolen dollar traced back to addresses connected to Melissa and Marcus. Transaction dates, amounts, fake invoices, everything. Slides 29 through 45. The affair. Not salacious details but business evidence. Calendar invites for apartment viewings during claimed investor meetings. Real estate searches showing Andrew and Melissa planning their future together. Messages discussing timing the transition and making sure everything's in place before we tell her. Slides 46 through 58. Credit theft. Code repository logs showing my authorship of every major platform feature. Recorded conversations where Andrew claimed credit for my innovations. Investor presentations where he described himself as the technical visionary while I was relegated to implementation. Slides 59 through 62. The conspiracy. Email chains between Andrew, Melissa, and Marcus discussing my planned termination. The organizational chart that erased my co-founder status. The systematic isolation from board communications and strategic decisions. Slide 63. My proposal. Immediate termination of Andrew Hartwell and Melissa Vance. Full criminal investigation. Restoration of my proper ownership and authority. And my vision for the company's future, without the people who'd tried to steal it. 2 days before the confrontation, I called Richard Thornton from my apartment at 6 in the morning. He answered on the 3rd ring, his voice groggy. Hannah, it's 6 a.m. What's wrong? Richard, I need to invoke Section 4.3 of our shareholders' agreement. I'm calling an emergency board meeting for this Wednesday at 2 p.m. Silence. Then, that's highly irregular. What's going on? I'm exercising my rights as co-founder to call an emergency meeting when there's evidence of financial misconduct or breach of fiduciary duty. Hannah. You're going to want every board member there, Richard. And you might want legal counsel on standby. More silence. I could hear him processing, probably pulling up our shareholders' agreement to verify I actually had this authority. How bad is it? I looked at my monitors, displaying slide after slide of Andrew's crimes. Bad enough that if even half of what I present is accurate, Andrew and Melissa will never work in tech again. Richard's voice dropped. All business now. I'll make the calls. But Hannah, whatever you're planning, you need to be absolutely certain you have the evidence to back it up. Andrew has relationships with these board members. They trust him. If you come in with accusations and can't prove them, this will backfire spectacularly. I have everything I need. After I hung up, I sat alone in my empty apartment, surrounded by evidence of my husband's betrayal, and allowed myself one moment of doubt. Was I about to blow up my marriage, my company, possibly my entire life? Then I remembered his smirk as he told me I was fired. Melissa's satisfied smile. That broken chair they'd made me drag through the office as my final humiliation. They'd already destroyed everything. I was just making sure everyone knew about it. The morning of my termination, I woke up before Andrew. He was still asleep, one arm flung across the empty space where I'd been lying. I studied his face in the early light coming through our bedroom window, relaxed, peaceful, completely unburdened by guilt or conscience. In 24 hours, that peace would be shattered. I showered, dressed in the same charcoal suit I'd worn to our first investor pitch 3 years ago. If this was going to be my last day as an employee of the company I'd founded, I wanted to look like someone who belonged there. Andrew was already gone when I came downstairs. No note. No text. Just an empty coffee cup in the sink and the faint smell of his cologne lingering in the kitchen. My phone buzzed at 8:45. Andrew's assistant, Carol. Hannah, Andrew needs to see you in his office. Immediately. Her voice had a strange quality, too careful, too rehearsed. Like she was reading from a script. I'll be right there, I said, even though we both knew this wasn't a request. The drive to the office took 15 minutes. I spent every second of it breathing slowly, keeping my hands steady on the wheel, reminding myself that this was theater. Andrew's final performance. And I just needed to play my part until tomorrow's board meeting. The parking garage was nearly full. I had to park in the uncovered section now, the spots farthest from the building, because Andrew had reorganized parking assignments 3 months ago. Executive leadership got covered parking. Everyone else, including the co-founder who'd built the technology that made the company valuable, walked through Phoenix summer heat. I grabbed my laptop bag and walked toward the building, feeling the 110-degree heat press against my skin like a physical weight. Inside, the air conditioning was almost shocking. I took the elevator to the second floor, where the main workspace sprawled out in an open floor plan I'd helped design. Developers hunched over their monitors. Project managers clustered around whiteboards. The normal hum of productive work. But as I walked toward Andrew's corner office, heads started turning. Conversations died mid-sentence. People watched me pass with expressions that ranged from curiosity to pity to something darker, satisfaction. They knew. Somehow they all knew what was about to happen. Carol was at her desk outside Andrew's office, her eyes fixed on her computer screen like it was the most fascinating thing she'd ever seen. She couldn't look at me. Go ahead, she said quietly. They're waiting. They. Plural. I opened the door and stepped into a scene that had clearly been choreographed for maximum humiliation. Andrew sat behind his massive mahogany desk, the one we'd bought together at an estate sale, joking that one day we'd be successful enough to deserve it. Melissa stood beside him, her hand resting possessively on his shoulder, wearing a crimson power suit that probably cost $3,000. Her hair was perfectly styled, her makeup flawless. She looked like she was posing for a magazine photo shoot about female executives. Gary from HR lurked in the corner, clutching a manila folder against his chest like a shield. He at least had the decency to look uncomfortable. The overhead lights were harsh, angled in a way that cast shadows across my face. I realized with a sick jolt that this was intentional. Andrew had positioned the lighting to make me look older, more tired, more defeated. This wasn't just a termination. It was a production. Sit down, Hannah, Andrew said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. I'm fine standing. Something flickered in his eyes, annoyance that I wasn't following his script. But he recovered quickly, his expression settling back into cold professionalism. Suit yourself. He picked up a document from his desk and slid it across the polished surface toward me. The paper made a soft scratching sound as it moved. Effective immediately, your employment with Apex Digital Solutions is terminated. The words hung in the air between us. I looked down at the termination letter. My name. My position listed as technical lead. Not co-founder, not CTO. The reasons for termination: performance issues, failure to collaborate with leadership, and conduct inconsistent with company values. I read it twice, letting the lies sink in. Then I looked up at Andrew. Performance issues, I said flatly. Yes. He leaned back in his chair, the $1,500 Herman Miller executive chair I'd never been offered. Your work has been declining for months. You've become difficult to work with. Combative in meetings. Resistant to strategic direction. Each accusation was delivered smoothly, like he'd practiced this speech. Maybe he had. Maybe he'd stood in front of his bathroom mirror rehearsing how to destroy me. And drag that broken office chair with you when you leave, he added, gesturing to the corner where my old chair sat. The one that tilted dangerously to the left. The one that had pinched my back through countless 18-hour coding sessions. Wouldn't want you claiming we kept your property. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. That chair had become a running joke between us in the early days. One day we'll be successful enough to replace this piece of junk, he'd said, laughing. Now it was a prop in my humiliation. Melissa stepped forward, her smile sharp and satisfied. I'll be taking over as Chief Technology Officer, effective immediately. He paused, letting that sink in. I know this is difficult, Hannah, but sometimes companies just outgrow their original staff. It's nothing personal. Original staff. The words landed like a slap. I'm not staff, I said quietly. I'm a co-founder. I built every line of code that makes this company worth $23 million. We're a co-founder, Andrew corrected. Your ownership stake has been diluted significantly due to performance-based adjustments. It's all documented in the corporate filings. You should have paid more attention. My phone vibrated in my pocket. The double pulse I'd programmed. Richard Thornton's confirmation that the emergency board meeting was scheduled for tomorrow at 2 p.m. 24 hours. That's all they had left. I could have screamed at them. Could have thrown the termination letter in Andrew's face. Could have told them exactly what I'd discovered about the embezzlement, the forged documents, the criminal conspiracy they'd built. But that wasn't the plan. The plan required me to play the part of the defeated woman who didn't see it coming. So I stayed silent. Gary cleared his throat. Security is waiting outside to escort you out. Standard protocol for all terminations. Of course, I said. Wouldn't want to make a scene. Andrew pulled out another envelope, this one with a law firm's logo embossed in the corner. He set it on the desk between us like it was nothing, like he was passing me a restaurant menu. The divorce papers are already filed, he said casually. They'll be served tomorrow morning at the house. I figured it would be cleaner to handle everything at once, professional and personal. Just rip the Band-Aid off, you know? 3 years of marriage. 8 years of knowing each other. He was ending both our partnership and our marriage in the same 10-minute meeting, surrounded by witnesses, with the same emotional investment he'd give to canceling a subscription service. Melissa's hand moved from his shoulder to his arm, a gesture of comfort and possession. The intimacy of it was obscene. Hannah, this doesn't have to be ugly, she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. You can still be proud of what you helped build in the early days. Not everyone gets to be part of something that becomes this successful. Helped build. Early days. Like I was some minor contributor whose role had been completed and was no longer needed. The door opened behind me. 2 security guards stepped inside. Tony and Marcus, guys I'd chatted with every morning for 3 years. They wouldn't meet my eyes now. Let's make this easy, Tony muttered, his voice apologetic. Through the glass walls of Andrew's office, I could see the entire company watching. Developers had abandoned their code. Project managers had stopped mid-presentation. Everyone was frozen, staring at the spectacle. Some faces showed sympathy. Others looked uncomfortable, like they were witnessing something they wished they could unsee. But a few, the newer employees, the ones Andrew had carefully cultivated, wore expressions of satisfaction. Finally, their faces said. Finally, the difficult woman who questioned everything was being removed. Andrew stood up and his smirk grew wider. Don't forget your chair, he said again, pointing to that broken piece of furniture in the corner. I insist. I understood then. This final touch of humiliation wasn't improvised. It was the centerpiece of his performance. He wanted everyone to see me dragging that broken chair through the office. Wanted them to watch me reduced to collecting my sad little belongings like a fired secretary, not a founder being illegally forced out. I walked to that chair, gripped its worn armrests, and pulled. It scraped across Andrew's polished concrete floors with a terrible sound that echoed through the entire office. Every conversation stopped. Every head turned. I dragged it past my desk, the one I'd occupied since we moved into this building. Past the developers I'd personally hired and trained. Past Casey, who looked like she might cry. Past the conference room where I'd presented our first major breakthrough to investors 3 years ago. Past the wall of awards. Tech Innovator of the Year. Best Cybersecurity Platform. Fastest growing startup. Every single one bore Andrew's name alone as if I'd never existed. The lobby doors opened automatically. The Phoenix heat hit me like a wall. 110 degrees, the kind of dry heat that stole the moisture from your lungs. Security followed 3 steps behind, their radios crackling with routine traffic. My car was parked in the far corner of the uncovered lot, where Andrew had relegated me months ago. I walked toward it, pulling that ridiculous chair, sweat already forming on my back. Other employees watched from the windows. I could feel their eyes following me. I reached my car and opened the trunk. The chair barely fit, one wheel hanging out at an awkward angle. I had to shove it twice before it settled. Then I sat in the driver's seat for exactly 3 minutes, watching the dashboard clock tick forward. 9:47, 9:48, 9:49. At 9:50 I started the car and drove away from Apex Digital Solutions for what Andrew thought was the last time. I didn't go home to the house we'd shared. Instead, I drove to my secret apartment in Tempe, the one he didn't know existed, the one that had become my war room over the past 2 months. I parked in the covered garage, pulled that broken chair out of my trunk and carried it upstairs. Inside my sparse apartment, I set it in the corner next to my 3 monitors. A trophy. A reminder. Then I opened my laptop and pulled up the presentation that would destroy Andrew's world. 63 slides. All the evidence. All the documentation. All the proof. 24 hours from now, every board member would see exactly what he'd done. And that broken chair would be the last thing he ever made me carry. I sat in my apartment staring at that broken chair for a long time after I brought it upstairs. The afternoon sun slanted through the window, highlighting every scratch and dent in the worn metal frame. My phone buzzed. A text from a number I didn't recognize at first, then realized was Maya, my younger sister. She must have gotten my number from our parents. Leah told me what happened. Where are you? I'm coming over. I hesitated, then sent her the address of the apartment. If I was going to war tomorrow, maybe I needed someone who still believed I was worth fighting for. She arrived 30 minutes later, carrying 2 bags of Thai food and wearing paint-splattered jeans from her job teaching art at a Phoenix high school. Maya was 7 years younger than me, the creative one in the family while I was the logical one. We'd never been particularly close. Different interests, different lives. But when she walked into my sparse apartment and looked around at the 3 monitors and mattress on the floor, her face softened with concern. "This looks like either a serial killer's hideout or a genius's laboratory," she said, setting the food on my desk. "Which one are you?" I laughed, actually laughed, for the first time in what felt like weeks. "I'm not sure yet." She hugged me hard, the kind of fierce hug that said she knew I was breaking even if I was pretending not to be. Leah told me everything. The affair, the embezzlement, the forged documents. All of it. I pulled away, suddenly defensive. Leah wasn't supposed to tell anyone. Don't be mad at her. She's terrified for you. We all are. Maya sat cross-legged on my floor like we were teenagers again, opening food containers. "So what's the plan? Please tell me you're not just walking away from everything you built." I gestured to the monitors. "That's the plan." She stood and walked over to my desk, studying the presentation displayed across 3 screens. I watched her face as she scrolled through slide after slide. Original incorporation documents, forged signatures, financial records showing systematic theft, email chains documenting the conspiracy. Her expression shifted from shock to anger to something that looked almost like pride. "Hannah, this is brilliant," she said quietly. "This isn't revenge. This is justice." I felt something loosen in my chest at her words. Maybe that's what I needed to hear, that I wasn't just being vindictive or petty. That what I was doing mattered. But then Maya paused on a slide showing the company's financial overview and valuation projections. Her brow furrowed. Wait. If you expose all this fraud tomorrow, won't it hurt the company's value? Your company. The question landed like a punch. I'd been so focused on documenting Andrew's crimes that I hadn't fully considered the collateral damage. What do you mean? Maya turned to look at me, her expression serious. You're about to reveal that the CEO has been embezzling money and committing fraud. That's going to make investors nervous. Some might pull out. The valuation could crash. And what about all the employees? The developers you hired? If the company goes under because of this, they lose their jobs. I sat down heavily on the edge of my mattress. I can't just let him get away with it. I'm not saying you should. I'm asking, have you thought about what comes after? What happens to everything you built once you burn down the people who tried to steal it? He was right. Maya was always the one who thought about consequences and emotions while I focused on logic and evidence. But this time I needed both. After she left, making me promise to eat the Thai food and get some sleep, I sat alone in my apartment with her question echoing in my head. Was destroying Andrew worth potentially destroying the company I'd spent 3 years building? The platform I'd created was genuinely revolutionary. It could predict cyber attacks before they happened, protecting companies and their data from threats they didn't even know existed. Clients relied on it. Employees depended on the company for their livelihoods. If I exposed everything tomorrow and the company collapsed, would that be justice or just mutual destruction? At 10 p.m. I called Sandra Westbrook, my lawyer. Hannah, everything okay? If I present all this evidence to the board tomorrow, what happens to the company? Will investors panic and pull out? Sandra was quiet for a moment, thinking. Honestly, there'll be short-term chaos. Some investors might get nervous. But here's what you need to understand. Investors care about 2 things: return on their money and competent leadership. Right now, they think Andrew is competent leadership. You need to show them he's not just incompetent, he's criminal. That might make them want to distance themselves from the whole thing. Or, Sandra said slowly, it might make them realize they've been backing the wrong person. If you position yourself as the solution, the actual founder who built the technology, the person who can stabilize and lead, you might come out of this stronger than before. You really think so? The board needs to see that you're not trying to destroy the company. You're trying to save it from the people who've been stealing from it. Andrew is the liability, not you. Make that clear. After I hung up, I opened my presentation and stared at slide 63. The final slide that simply said recommendations. Immediate termination of Andrew Hartwell and Melissa Vance. Sandra was right. That wasn't enough. I needed to show the board what came next. I created a new section, slides 64 through 70. My vision for the company's future without Andrew. Plans for the platform's next evolution. Strategies for rebuilding investor confidence. A proposed organizational structure that prioritized technical innovation over Andrew's obsession with appearances. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about rescue. Around midnight, while adding the finishing touches to my restructuring proposal, I found something new in the email archives I'd downloaded from Andrew's laptop weeks ago. A thread between Andrew and Marcus Brennan, his college roommate, the lawyer who'd helped set up the shell companies, that I'd somehow missed before. The subject line read, H removal strategy timeline and legal protection. My hands trembled as I opened it. Marcus had written out a detailed step-by-step plan for forcing me out while protecting Andrew from legal consequences. It was dated 8 months ago, long before I'd discovered any of this, back when I was still trusting and naive. Step 1. Dilute ownership gradually through strategic partner addition. Hannah won't question bringing in operational expertise. File amended docs showing reduced stake. Step 2. Document performance issues. Every time she questions decisions, note it as difficult behavior and resistance to leadership. Build paper trail. Step 3. Position Melissa as superior option. Slowly shift H's responsibilities to M. When board compares them, M should appear more qualified. Step 4. Terminate H just before filing divorce. Claim company reasons, not personal. This protects marital asset division. She's an employee being fired for cause, not a co-founder being forced out. Step 5. File divorce immediately after termination. By then, corporate documents show H as minority stakeholder and former employee. Limits her claim to company assets. Marcus had mapped out my destruction like it was a legal brief. And Andrew had followed the plan perfectly. I took screenshots of every email in the thread and added a new section to my presentation. Third-party conspiracy. Marcus Brennan's legal malpractice. Evidence that Marcus had not only helped with the embezzlement but had actively designed the entire scheme to force me out while protecting Andrew legally. The forged ownership documents? Marcus had drafted them. The shell companies? Marcus had created them. The termination letter? Marcus had written it. This wasn't just Andrew and Melissa anymore. It was a three-person conspiracy that had been planned for months before I'd discovered anything. I added slides showing Marcus's bar license number, his law firm's registration, and a recommendation that the board refer him to the state bar for disciplinary proceedings and potential disbarment. If I was going to expose Andrew and Melissa, I was going to expose everyone who'd helped them try to destroy me. By 2 a.m., my presentation had grown to 73 slides. Every crime documented. Every conspirator named. Every piece of evidence backed up with original documents. But I still couldn't sleep. At 3 a.m. my phone lit up with a text from Leah. "You okay?" I called her instead of texting back. "What if it doesn't work?" I asked before she could say anything. "What if they side with Andrew anyway?" "Then you'll know you tried," Leah said, her voice firm. "But Hannah, you have documentation they can't argue with. Forged signatures. Stolen money. Recorded conversations. They'd have to be willfully blind to side with him. His family has connections. Richard Thornton invested because of Andrew's father's golf club. What if loyalty matters more than evidence? Then those aren't people you want to be in business with anyway." Leah paused. "But I don't think it'll come to that. Richard didn't become a successful venture capitalist by backing criminals and ignoring fraud. He'll see the evidence and make the rational choice. What if I'm wrong? What if I've spent 2 months building a case that falls apart the moment Andrew starts talking?" "Hannah." Leah's voice softened. "You're the smartest person I know. You've documented everything. You have proof he can't explain away. Stop doubting yourself." After we hung up, I tried to sleep but couldn't. My mind kept racing through scenarios. Andrew's defense, Richard's questions, the board's possible reactions. I got up and went over the presentation again, anticipating every possible challenge, every question they might ask, every defense Andrew might try. At 5:30 I gave up on sleep entirely. I made coffee and watched through my apartment window as the Phoenix sky slowly shifted from black to deep purple to orange as the sun rose over the desert. Today was the day. In 9 hours I'd walk into that board meeting and present 73 slides of evidence that would either reclaim my company or destroy everything I'd built trying. My phone buzzed one more time. "Maya, go get him. You've got this." I looked at the broken office chair sitting in the corner of my apartment, then at the 3 monitors displaying my presentation. Andrew thought he'd won yesterday when he made me drag that chair through the office. Thought he'd humiliated me into submission. He had no idea what was coming. I finished my coffee, showered, and put on the same charcoal suit I'd worn yesterday, the one from our first investor pitch. If this was going to be the day I took back my company, I wanted to look like the founder I'd always been. Not the employee they'd tried to make me. I arrived at the office at noon, a full 3 hours before the board meeting. The parking lot was nearly empty. Most employees were out for lunch. I pulled into a visitor spot, not the covered parking I'd lost months ago, and sat in my car for a moment, gathering myself. This was it. Everything I'd worked for over the past 2 months came down to the next few hours. I grabbed my laptop bag and 3 backup drives, then walked through the lobby doors. The receptionist looked up, startled to see me. "Hannah?" I thought. "Emergency board meeting," I said calmly. "Richard Thornton should have notified security." She checked her computer, confused but professional. "Yes, you're cleared. Conference room B." The main conference room. The same room where Andrew had presented my innovations as his own countless times. I took the elevator to the 2nd floor, my heart beating steadily but hard. The conference room was empty, exactly as I'd hoped. I needed time to set up without Andrew or Melissa interfering. I arranged 3 laptops on the table, my primary presentation machine and 2 backups in case Andrew tried something technical to sabotage me. I'd learned long ago not to underestimate him even when I held all the cards. The projector took a few minutes to configure. I ran through the presentation once, making sure every slide loaded correctly, Every video clip played, every document displayed clearly. Then I set out physical folders at each board member's seat. Inside each folder, printed copies of the key evidence, organized with tabs and annotations. The original founding documents showing 50-50 ownership. The forged transfer documents with signature analysis highlighting the discrepancies. Bank statements showing the fraudulent wire transfers. Shell company registration papers. I'd also prepared USB drives, one for each board member, containing the complete evidence package watermarked and encrypted. Even if Andrew somehow convinced them to ignore what they saw today, they'd have permanent records they couldn't dismiss. At 1:30 Richard Thornton arrived. He looked older than I remembered from our last meeting 6 months ago. The stress showed in the lines around his eyes, the gray that had spread through his hair. He'd read the preliminary documents I'd sent last night, a summary of what I'd be presenting, and it clearly hadn't let him sleep. "Hannah," he said, closing the conference room door behind him. "I read through everything you sent. If even half of it is accurate." "It's all accurate, Richard. Every single page. And I have originals of everything." He sat down heavily in one of the leather conference chairs, the kind Andrew had insisted on buying when we moved into this office. "This is going to destroy him." I met his eyes directly. "He destroyed himself. I'm just making sure everyone knows about it." Richard rubbed his face with both hands. "His father is going to, God, this is going to be a nightmare. I'm sorry you're caught in the middle of this." "Don't be." He looked up at me and his expression had hardened. "If Andrew's been doing what you say he's been doing, then he deserves whatever's coming. I put $2 million into this company because I believed in the technology. Your technology. If he's been stealing and lying, then he's not the man I thought he was." The other board members filtered in over the next 20 minutes. James Park arrived first, looking confused about the sudden meeting but professional as always. He'd invested $2 million in our Series A round, betting on our potential when we were barely more than a prototype and a pitch deck. Catherine Mendez came next, her expression curious and slightly annoyed at being pulled away from whatever she'd had planned for her afternoon. She joined the board during Series B, bringing connections and expertise that had helped us scale rapidly. David Okonkwo was the last board member to arrive. A serious man in his 50s who represented a pension fund that had invested heavily in our Series B. He carried a leather portfolio and wore an expression that said he didn't appreciate being summoned without explanation. They all took their seats, examining the folders I'd placed in front of them with varying degrees of interest. "Hannah," James said carefully, "what exactly are we doing here?" "I invoked my emergency meeting rights under Section 4.3 of our shareholders' agreement," I said. "When there's evidence of financial misconduct or breach of fiduciary duty, any co-founder can call an immediate board meeting." Catherine frowned. "Co-founder? I thought you were." She stopped herself, glancing at the folder in front of her. "That's part of what we're here to discuss," I said. At exactly 2 p.m. the conference room door opened. Andrew walked in with Melissa beside him. Both wore expressions of confident confusion, like they were certain this was some kind of misunderstanding they'd clear up in minutes. Andrew's eyes swept the room, taking in the board members, the folders, my position at the head of the table. His usual seat. "Hannah, what is this about?" he demanded, his voice carrying that tone of reasonable authority he'd perfected. "You can't just call board meetings. You don't even work here anymore." Richard Thornton's voice cut through the room like a blade. "Actually, she can. She invoked her co-founder rights under the original shareholders' agreement." He paused, his gaze shifting to Andrew with an expression I'd never seen before, cold assessment. "Rights that, I'm learning, may have been fraudulently stripped from her." Andrew's confident mask slipped for just a fraction of a second. I saw fear flash across his face before he recovered. "That's ridiculous. Hannah's been having some kind of breakdown. She's been unstable for months, making wild accusations." "Sit down, Andrew." Richard's voice was quiet but absolute. "I don't think you understand what's happening here." "Sit down." Richard gestured to a chair at the opposite end of the table from me. "Given what I've seen in Hannah's preliminary evidence, we're all going to sit down, shut up, and listen to what she has to say." Melissa tried to step in, her voice professionally concerned. "With all due respect, Mr. Thornton, this is highly irregular. We should postpone this meeting until we can properly review whatever allegations. Catherine Mendez interrupted, her voice ice cold. Ms. Vance, you're not a board member. You're here as a courtesy because Hannah indicated you're named in the evidence. I suggest you sit down and stay quiet. Melissa's polished composure cracked slightly. She glanced at Andrew, who gave her a small nod. They both sat. I stood at the head of the conference table. Andrew's usual position, the seat of power he'd claimed as exclusively his for the past 2 years. My hands were steady as I opened my laptop. My voice was calm when I spoke. Thank you all for coming on such short notice. What I'm about to present represents 18 months of systematic fraud, embezzlement and corporate malfeasance conducted by Andrew Hartwell, Melissa Vance, and their legal advisor Marcus Brennan. I paused, making eye contact with each board member. By the end of this presentation, you'll understand exactly why I'm requesting their immediate termination as employees and officers of this company, with full investigation into potential criminal charges. Andrew started to stand. This is absurd. Richard held up his hand without looking at him. If you interrupt again, I'll have security remove you from the room and we'll continue without you. Andrew sat back down, his jaw clenched. I clicked to the first slide. The original incorporation documents, clean and clear on the projector screen. This shows our founding documents from 3 years ago. Andrew Hartwell and Hannah Karim, equal co-founders with 50% ownership each. Equal board representation. Equal authority over company decisions. Next slide. The forged documents. This shows the amended ownership documents filed with the state 6 months ago, supposedly with my written consent. According to these documents, my ownership was reduced to 35%. Andrew's increased to 45%. And Melissa Vance somehow received 20% equity for strategic leadership contributions. I let that sink in for a moment, watching the board members lean forward to study the documents. Now notice the signature on these transfer documents. I zoomed in on the signature line. This is supposedly my signature authorizing the transfer of 15% of my equity. I clicked to the next slide, showing multiple examples of my real signature from various corporate documents over the past 3 years. Here's my actual signature from employment agreements, vendor contracts, and office leases. The differences are obvious. The forged signature doesn't even match my handwriting style. The loops are wrong, the angles are wrong, the pressure is wrong. I displayed the forensic analysis I'd commissioned from a document examiner. This is a professional signature analysis comparing the forged documents to my genuine signatures. The conclusion is unambiguous. The signature on the ownership transfer documents is not mine. Someone forged it. Andrew's face had gone pale. Melissa was staring at the table. So the question becomes, I continued, who had the motive, means, and opportunity to forge my signature and file fraudulent ownership documents with the state? For the next hour and a half, I methodically destroyed every lie Andrew had built. Slide after slide of bank records showing wire transfers to fake consulting companies. I traced each shell company back to its registration. Melissa's cousin's address in Mesa, Marcus Brennan's law office in Scottsdale, a Delaware registered agent with no physical location. Email chains where Andrew and Melissa discussed timing the transition smoothly and managing Hannah's exit. Messages where Marcus laid out the step-by-step plan for forcing me out while protecting Andrew legally. Recordings of Andrew in investor meetings, claiming he'd guided the technical vision of products I'd conceived and built entirely alone. His voice filled the conference room, smooth and confident, taking credit for innovations he'd barely understood. Code repository logs with timestamps showing every commit, every change, every major feature addition. All traced back to my account, my work, my late nights turning ideas into functioning reality. Calendar records showing Andrew viewing luxury condos with Melissa during hours he'd told me he was in investor meetings. Real estate searches with notes like, Melissa approved this one, and move-in ready by March. The divorce filing, dated and ready to be served the day after my termination, timed perfectly to catch me at my most vulnerable. By the time I reached slide 73, the final slide of evidence, Andrew was slumped in his chair, all his confident charisma evaporated. Melissa looked like she might be physically sick, her face pale and drawn. The board members' expressions had shifted from initial skepticism to shock to something colder and harder. The look of people who'd been lied to and were now calculating exactly how angry they should be. I closed my laptop and faced them directly. I'm not here to destroy this company. I built Apex Digital Solutions from nothing and I intend to lead it into the future. But I can't do that with people who've been systematically stealing from us, lying to investors and committing fraud. I distributed the final section of my proposal, the restructuring plan I'd added last night. This outlines my recommendation for moving forward. Immediate termination of Andrew Hartwell as CEO and employee, with full investigation into criminal charges. Immediate termination of Melissa Vance with similar investigation. Referral of Marcus Brennan to the State Bar for disbarment proceedings. Restoration of my proper 50% ownership stake. And my appointment as CEO, with a clear vision for the company's future that prioritizes technical innovation and ethical leadership. Richard Thornton looked around the table at the other board members. Does anyone have questions before we vote? Catherine Mendez raised her hand. Hannah, why didn't you come to us when you first discovered this? Why wait until after your termination? I'd anticipated this question. Because Andrew spent 2 years positioning himself as the visionary leader and me as technical support. He cultivated personal relationships with all of you while systematically isolating me from board communications and strategic decisions. If I'd come forward with partial evidence months ago, he would have claimed I was unstable, jealous of Melissa, or trying to sabotage the company out of personal grievances. I paused. I needed irrefutable proof. Documentation so thorough and comprehensive that even Andrew's charm, his family connections, and his carefully constructed narrative couldn't explain it away. Catherine nodded slowly. You have that now. Richard's voice was formal, final. All in favor of Hannah Karim's proposal for immediate termination of Andrew Hartwell and Melissa Vance, investigation into criminal charges, and Hannah's appointment as CEO? Every hand went up. Unanimous. Andrew's face went white. You can't do this. My father invested specifically because... Your father, Richard said, his voice cold as winter, invested in this company because of Hannah's technology. Not because of your last name. And when he learns you've been embezzling funds and committing securities fraud, I suspect he'll be leading the charge for criminal prosecution himself. Richard pressed a button on the conference phone. Security to conference room B, please. The same 2 guards who'd escorted me out yesterday appeared in the doorway within minutes. Please escort Mr. Hartwell and Ms. Vance from the building, Richard said. They are no longer employees or officers of this company. The symmetry was almost poetic. As Andrew passed my chair, he leaned close enough that only I could hear him whisper, "You'll regret this." I looked up at him, at the man I'd loved, married, built a company with, and smiled. No, Andrew. You'll regret underestimating me. Security led them both out. The conference room door closed behind them with a soft click. For a moment no one spoke. Then James Park started clapping. Slowly at first, then with genuine enthusiasm. The other board members joined in. I'd done it. I'd taken back my company. But as I stood there accepting their congratulations and beginning to discuss next steps, I felt something unexpected. Not triumph. Not satisfaction. Just a strange, hollow emptiness where anger used to be. The applause faded and reality set in. I was CEO of Apex Digital Solutions. The title I should have held from the beginning. The role Andrew had stolen from me through systematic manipulation and fraud. But as I stood there in the conference room accepting congratulations from board members who'd just voted unanimously to support me, I didn't feel the triumph I'd imagined during those long nights in my secret apartment. I felt exhausted. Hollowed out. Like I'd spent every ounce of energy I had just to reclaim what should have been mine all along. Richard Thornton shook my hand, his grip firm and sincere. Hannah, I owe you an apology. I should have seen what was happening. Should have questioned why you were being sidelined. You believed someone you trusted, I said. That's not a crime. No, but it was negligent. He glanced at the folders of evidence still spread across the conference table. I let Andrew's charm and his family connections cloud my judgment. I won't make that mistake again. The next 72 hours were controlled chaos. News of Andrew's termination spread through Phoenix's tech community faster than I'd anticipated. My phone rang constantly. Reporters asking for statements, competitors trying to poach our clients, employees demanding explanations for what had happened. Some employees were relieved. Casey, the young developer I'd hired 2 years ago, stopped by my temporary office. I hadn't yet moved into Andrew's corner space, with tears in her eyes. "I knew something was wrong," she said. "The way he talked over you in meetings, the way he took credit for features you'd built. I just didn't know how to say anything without sounding like I was causing trouble." But others were loyal to Andrew. 3 developers quit within 24 hours, claiming I'd staged a corporate coup and that Andrew had been the real visionary behind the company's success. I let them go. If they couldn't see the truth even after the board had reviewed overwhelming evidence, I didn't want them here. On the 3rd day after the board meeting, I called an all-hands meeting. 43 employees gathered in our main workspace, down from the 60 we'd had before Andrew's termination. The ones who remained looked anxious, uncertain about the company's future. I stood at the front of the room, the same space where Andrew had unveiled that organizational chart that erased my co-founder status, where Melissa had presented operational strategies she'd developed without my input. "I know the past few days have been confusing and stressful," I began. "So I want to be transparent about what happened and where we're going from here." I told them the truth. Not every detail. They didn't need to know about the affair or the personal betrayal, but enough to understand the business crimes that had been committed. Andrew Hartwell and Melissa Vance were terminated for financial misconduct and fraud. They embezzled nearly $400,000 from this company over 18 months. They forged corporate documents to illegally transfer ownership. And they systematically lied to investors, clients, and all of you about who was responsible for the technology that makes Apex valuable. I paused, making eye contact with people throughout the room. The board reviewed extensive documentation and voted unanimously to support their termination and my appointment as CEO. I understand this is shocking. I understand some of you may have questions about my leadership or the company's stability. But I want to be absolutely clear about something. I gestured to the monitors around the room, displaying code that I'd written. I built this company's technology from nothing. Every major feature, every algorithm, every innovation that makes our platform revolutionary, I created it. I'm not technical support. I'm not background staff. I'm the architect of everything this company is built on. And I'm the one who's going to lead us forward. Casey raised her hand. "Is the company in financial trouble? Should we be worried about our jobs?" The fraud totaled $387,000, which Andrew will be required to repay through legal proceedings. Beyond that, our finances are strong. Our platform works better than ever. Our clients are satisfied. And we have a clear growth strategy for the next 2 years. I smiled, trying to project confidence I didn't entirely feel yet. "Your jobs are safe. This company is safe. We're going to be fine." After the meeting, several employees approached me individually with apologies. For not speaking up sooner, for believing Andrew's version of events, for treating me like I was less important than I actually was. I accepted their apologies gracefully, but inside, I felt the weight of how completely I'd been erased. Even people who'd worked beside me for years had somehow been convinced that Andrew was the genius and I was just the person who implemented his vision. A week after the board meeting, Maya showed up at my apartment unannounced. I was still living there, unable to face the house I'd shared with Andrew. The divorce papers had been served and my lawyer was handling the proceedings, but I couldn't bring myself to go back to that space filled with memories of a marriage that had been a lie. "You look terrible," Maya said, setting down bags of Chinese food on my desk. "When's the last time you slept more than 4 hours?" "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You won, Hannah. You destroyed Andrew completely. Took back your company, exposed his crimes, probably ended his career in tech forever. So why do you look like you lost everything?" I sat down on my mattress on the floor, suddenly too tired to pretend. Because maybe I did lose. My marriage. 3 years of my life. The belief that someone could love me and partner with me honestly. Maya sat beside me, her shoulder pressed against mine in silent support. "Andrew never loved you honestly. He loved what you could build for him. That's not the same thing. I know that intellectually. But emotionally." I couldn't finish the sentence. "You get to be angry," Maya said firmly. "You get to feel betrayed. You get to grieve what you thought you had. But Hannah, don't let bitterness poison what you've won. You have your company back. You have your creation. That's more than most people get in situations like this. He told me I'd regret this, I admitted quietly. Andrew. As security was escorting him out. He said I'd regret destroying him. Maya's expression hardened. He's the one who'll live with regret. You're the one who'll live with victory. There's a difference. 3 weeks into my role as CEO, I made my first major hire, Patricia Summers as Chief Operating Officer. She was 55 with 30 years of operational experience across multiple tech companies. She'd scaled 3 successful startups and had a reputation for no-nonsense leadership and operational excellence. During her interview, I decided to be completely honest about what had happened. The previous COO was having an affair with my ex-husband and helped him embezzle from the company. She actively worked to undermine me and position herself as my replacement. I need someone I can trust completely, someone who sees me as the legitimate leader here, not as someone to work around or eventually replace. Patricia looked at me over her reading glasses, her expression thoughtful. Hannah, I've worked in tech for 3 decades. I've seen brilliant women undermined by mediocre men more times than I can count. I've watched companies fail because they valued charm over competence, connections over capability. She leaned forward. If you're offering me the chance to help build a company where the person who created the value actually gets to lead, I'm absolutely in. And if anyone tries to undermine you, they'll have to go through me first. She started 2 weeks later. On her first day, we held a leadership meeting to discuss restructuring the operations department. Patricia sat beside me at the conference table and, when introducing herself to the team, said clearly, "I'm here to support Hannah's vision for this company. She's the boss. Everything we do in operations needs to serve the platform she's built and the strategy she's developing." That simple word, boss, said with genuine respect and no hint of condescension, made something tight in my chest finally loosen. Over the next 3 months, Patricia and I rebuilt the operations department from the ground up. We hired based on competence rather than connections. We implemented transparent processes for decision-making. We created clear communication channels that ensured I was never again cut out of strategic discussions. Slowly, painfully, the company began to stabilize. 6 months after the board meeting, I finally moved into the corner office. Andrew's former office. The space he'd claimed as exclusively his while I sat in an open workspace with a broken chair. I hired contractors to redecorate. They removed Andrew's mahogany desk, his expensive artwork, the pretentious bookshelf filled with business books he'd never read. They repainted the walls, replaced the harsh overhead lighting with something warmer, installed floor-to-ceiling whiteboards where I could sketch out technical architectures. But I kept one thing from my old workspace. One item I'd brought from my secret apartment and refused to let anyone throw away. That broken office chair. The one that tilted dangerously to the left. The one Andrew had made me drag through the office as my final humiliation. I had the contractors place it in the corner of my new office, beside the sleek ergonomic chair they'd ordered for me. Patricia noticed it during one of our morning strategy meetings. She glanced at the worn, tilted chair and then at me with a quizzical expression. "Why do you keep that thing?" I walked over and touched the worn armrest, remembering the day Andrew had pointed to it and told me to drag it out. The scraping sound it had made across the concrete floors. The eyes of every employee watching my supposed humiliation. "To remember," I said simply. Andrew thought making me drag this chair out of the building would destroy me. He thought it would be my lowest moment, proof that I was nothing without him. But it was actually the moment I decided to stop being afraid and start fighting back. Patricia studied the chair for a moment, then nodded slowly. "It's a reminder that humiliation can be the beginning of power if you choose to use it that way." Exactly. Apex Digital Solutions is now worth $42 million, nearly double what it was valued at under Andrew's leadership. We've hired 25 new employees, including several senior developers who came specifically because they wanted to work for a woman-led tech company. We've secured 3 major contracts with Fortune 500 companies who trust the platform I built and the leadership I provide. I've personally presented at 2 major tech conferences, introduced not as technical support or the developer behind the platform, but as Hannah Karim, founder and CEO of Apex Digital Solutions. The divorce was finalized 4 months ago. Andrew tried to claim he deserved half the company's value as a marital asset, But my lawyer demolished that argument with evidence that he'd been systematically stealing from the company and forging documents. He walked away with nothing but his family's money and a reputation in ruins. Last I heard, he'd moved back to Scottsdale and was working for his father's real estate company. Melissa left the state entirely. I heard through mutual contacts that she's in Texas, working at a car dealership owned by a relative. Marcus, the lawyer who'd helped orchestrate the fraud, is facing disbarment proceedings. The state bar took my evidence very seriously. Sometimes, late at night when I'm working alone in my office, I push aside my comfortable ergonomic chair and sit in that broken one instead. I let it tilt dangerously to the left. Feel the familiar pinch in my back that I endured through countless 18-hour coding sessions. And I remember the day Andrew thought he was ending my story. The day he made me drag that chair through the office, past employees who watched what they thought was my defeat. He was so certain he'd won. So confident that I'd slink away quietly, accepting the role he'd assigned me, the disposable technical staff who'd served her purpose and could now be discarded. He had no idea that day was actually my beginning. The moment I stopped being the woman who built in the shadows and became the woman who fought in the light. I kept that broken chair because it reminds me of something important. Never underestimate the woman you try to destroy. She might be the one who built everything you're standing on. And she definitely knows how to take it all away and build something better in its place. If this story of brilliant revenge had you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when Hannah dragged that broken chair through the office, knowing the board meeting was just 24 hours away. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more thrilling stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.